snuck right in.
Yes. Green means you're live. No, you just push it and then it goes green. No, you just and it'll go green after you.
We'll get started in about 2 minutes. We'll just let a couple other people wander in and then we'll formally begin. Hey, Sarah. Thanks for being here. Good morning, everybody. Welcome to those of you who are in the room, and I know there are quite a number of folks on our webcast, or at least listening to our webcast. This is our Senate Bill 270 informal rulemaking workshop. So I want to welcome you to today's workshop. I'm Howard Levinson. I'm a Deputy Director here at CalRecycle, and I want to thank you for joining us today. We've invited you here today to share our initial thinking on how CalRecycle can implement the certification fee that's required for reusable grocery bags. It's required under the new statewide bag law, and to solicit your input on those regulations. We do know that a number of you, or many of you, will want additional time to review and digest the draft fee concepts that we're presenting here today. And to that end, we'll continue to accept public comments and input and suggestions through November 17th. Before we really get into the meat of the presentation by staff, I want to acknowledge that we have gotten many questions from retail stores, attorneys, bag producers, and a lot of other stakeholders with requests to interpret and in particular to enforce the law. So I think it's important for us to make it clear from the outset that the law is very clear that the department does not have enforcement authority under Senate Bill 270. Our authority, consistent with the statute, is to accept third-party certifications that are submitted to the department by reusable bag producers and to establish a certification fee schedule to cover its costs. So today's workshop is about that certification fee, which has to be developed and implemented under a formal regulatory framework. So today we're really seeking your comments, your constructive suggestions and comments on the draft regulatory text and the certification fee concepts for reusable bags that you're going to hear about. And then we'll look forward to working with all of you to further develop and refine this draft regulatory text. Staff also will be providing you with an update on our plans for the report to the legislature that's required under SB 270. It's due March 1st, 2018, and it's our intent to meet that deadline. So we'll look forward to getting your feedback on that as well. I'd like to introduce the team and then cover a couple of logistics before we go to the staff presentation. We have I see Kate. We have our legal office will be here, Kate Nitta. She is on her way. We have Sarah Keck to my very far left, branch chief of our fiscal services office, Deke Marshall, Paulina Kolek, Wendy Harmon, and Jim Hill and Robert Contreras in the back, Brenda Smith in the front, Clark Williams in the front. So we have quite a team that is working on this. That's a lot of management and admin and folks, but there are many people who are involved in thinking about this. In terms of just a few logistics, a couple of housekeeping keeping items. If you need to use the restroom, go out the back and take a left and another left. There's a cafeteria downstairs. Most importantly, if we do have a fire drill or any kind of emergency drill, we will go out the back doors and down the stairs, follow us, and our relocation area is across the street in Cesar Chavez Park, the large plaza in front of City Hall. So we will get you there safely. We have had a number of drills of late, so you never know what's going to happen, but we take them seriously, and I want to make sure that you're all safe. So with that, we're really happy to finally be here talking about the certification fee and the informal rulemaking process that we're undertaking today. We'll talk about this a little bit more, but most of you know that CalRecycle's mode of operation is that we will have informal workshops on regulatory concepts so that we can present those and get stakeholder feedback. And then at some point when we've done enough of those, and hopefully it will just be one time on this one, we will take the steps necessary to initiate the formal rulemaking process. That will occur sometime in the next few months, and then we have about a year to complete that. I think this is one that we will strive to complete before that, but there's a very specified set of steps that we have to undergo in the formal rulemaking process. So today we're really here to present concepts. We have a number of different ideas and get your feedback on those. So with that, I think I will turn it over to Paulina Kolick, who is going to make our presentation on the concepts, and
Thank
it's
you,
all
Howard.
yours.
Thank you to everyone who's joining us today in Byron Share and also on the webcast.
Closer, you need to speak into the mic more.
Okay, can everyone hear me? Great. Thank you again to everyone who's come to Byron Share today and is also listening in on the webcast. I look forward to working with y'all and hearing your feedback during the regulatory process. So my presentation today will last about 10 to 15 minutes. And so an overview of what I'll be covering today. First, we'll give a little bit of background on SB 270. We'll look at the rulemaking purpose and also the proposed timeline. We'll discuss CalRecycle's next steps in the regulatory process and give a brief update on the legislative report. We'll then move into the draft regulatory text, and then we'll cover the certification fee concepts and solicit stakeholder feedback on the draft reg text and also the fee concepts. So a little bit of background on SB 270. As you all may know, since 2007, over 100 cities and counties in California had adopted single-use plastic bag bans. Due to the number of different bans throughout the state, the legislature had an interest in instituting a statewide law. In 2014, SB 270 was signed by the governor. However, a referendum halted implementation of SB 270, which would have gone into effect on July 1st, 2015. SB 270 was voted on by Californians in the general election on November 8, 2016 as Prop 67. It was upheld and went into effect as written the very next day. This resulted in a shortened time frame for implementation than was originally intended. Under SB 270, CalRecycle has 5 statutory duties. They are to provide an online system to receive proofs of certification, to publish a list of certified grocery bag producers, to establish an administrative certification fee, to publish a list of retail establishments that voluntarily comply with SB 270, and finally to provide a status report by March 1st, 2018. To fulfill CalRecycle's statutory duties, we've developed and continue to maintain the Reusable Grocery Bag Reporting System, or RGBRS, for accepting reusable grocery bag proofs of certification. Upon acceptance of a proof of certification, that producer is added to CalRecycle's Certified Reusable Grocery Bag Producers List, which can be accessed by the public through CalRecycle's website. As of the beginning of this month, there are 50 reusable grocery bag producers and 144 certified reusable grocery bags. So now to move on into rulemaking. Generally speaking, rulemaking is used as a mechanism to help clarify statute. And specifically for SB 270, this rulemaking package will develop an administrative certification fee for usable grocery bags that is sufficient to cover CalRecycle's costs. We will also establish the procedures for submitting payment to the department. During this rulemaking process, stakeholder and public feedback will be solicited by CalRecycle, and staff will also respond to this feedback. This next slide shows a timeline of the rulemaking process for SB 270. The input received during this informal comment period will be considered, and staff will revise the draft regulatory text to include the preferred fee schedule. CalRecycle staff will then prepare and submit the rulemaking package to the director for approval to initiate formal rulemaking at a CalRecycle public meeting in early 2018. This will be followed by submission of the rulemaking package to the Office of Administrative Law. Once OAL publishes the draft regulations, a 45-day comment period will be triggered. After conclusion of that comment period, CalRecycle will respond to comments and hold a public hearing to present draft regulations. Next, the department will determine if revisions warrant a 15 or a 45-day comment period. And finally, a finalized version of the regulations will be presented at another CalRecycle public meeting for approval in late 2018, and then subsequently filed with OAL. As you can see, there will be many opportunities for public comment throughout this rulemaking process, and we welcome stakeholder feedback throughout. So next, a little bit about CalRecycle's next steps. At the conclusion of today's meeting, CalRecycle staff will review and consider comments that are received through November 17, 2017. We will further develop regulatory language and also prepare the necessary documents for a rulemaking package. In addition, we will continue development of the SB 270 status report that's due to the legislature by March 1st, 2018. Speaking of the legislative report, we wanted to give a brief update. Currently, CalRecycle staff is developing content for the legislative report, and we have received feedback and comments from stakeholders on the content of this report, and these comments are being taken into consideration. The legislative report will contain an update on implementation of SB 270, and additionally, CalRecycle staff has requested bag use data from 57 grocery store chains. This covers over 3,200 grocery stores statewide. We will also be including a status on rulemaking activities, a summary of stakeholder questions and feedback, as well as staff recommendations and future considerations in this report. So next, we'll go ahead and move on into the draft regulatory text. CalRecycle recognizes that the draft regulatory text and concepts for the fee schedule have only been available for a very short time. Thus, we'll give a brief introduction highlighting major points from each section of the regulatory text, and then we'll discuss the proposed certification fee concepts. Finally, we'll display each section of the draft regulatory text and solicit stakeholder feedback section by section. The draft regulatory text is broken down into 6 sections. They are scope and purpose, definitions, submittal and resubmittal of proof of certification, the administrative certification fee schedule, procedures for submitting payment to the department, and the last section is on proprietary information. So for the first section, scope and purpose, the scope and purpose of these regulations are to establish the administrative certification fee schedule and to clarify procedures for submission and resubmission of proofs of certification. In regards to definitions, CalRecycle proposes to add 6 definitions to aid in clarification of statute. They are Certified Reusable Grocery Bag Producers List, ISO IEC 17025, which is the International Organization for Standardization or International Electrotechnical Commission's general requirements for the competence of testing and calibration laboratories. Next definition is proof of certification, then reusable grocery bag reporting system, and third-party certification entity. Section 3 is on the submittal and resubmittal of proof of certification, and CalRecycle notes a few important points that the certification fee payment shall accompany a proof of certification, and each type of reusable grocery bag that has a unique size or material must have its own proof of certification that meets the requirements of sections 42281 and 42281.5 of the Public Resources Code. Proof of certification must be resubmitted every 2 years and updated, if applicable, including any information on post-consumer recycled content as required by Section 42281.5 of the Public Resources Code. Finally, please note that all proof of certification documents must be submitted under penalty of perjury. In regards to Section 4, the section on administrative certification fee schedule, CalRecycle staff has developed 2 concepts by which the certification fee could be implemented. One is based on the number of producers, and the other is based on the number of proofs of certification that are submitted for reusable grocery bags. One of these concepts will be chosen, and the preferred method will be integrated into the final draft of the regulations. So first I'll describe concept 1, which is based on the number of producers. In this first option, the certification fee is determined using the number of producers that are on CalRecycle's certified reusable grocery bag producers list. The following is a sample calculation of how this could be determined. In the equation below, CalRecycle's operating cost is divided by the number of certified producers on the list in order to determine the certification fee. Currently, there are 50 producers on the certified reusable grocery bag producers list, and this would amount to a fee of approximately $14,780 per producer. CalRecycle staff also notes that there are approximately 20 pending producers on our online database, and then there are an additional 20 producers on city or county databases. The addition of these producers would lower the certification fee, all other factors remaining constant. Concept 2 is based on the number of proofs of certification, and in this concept option, the certification fee is determined using the number of reusable grocery bags in the reusable grocery bag reporting system. The following is a sample calculation of how this could be determined if this concept was chosen. In the equation below, CalRecycle's operating costs will be divided by the number of certified reusable grocery bags to determine the fee. Currently, there are 144 bags that are certified, and this would amount to a fee of approximately $5,456 if this fee schedule was chosen. So for an example, we can look at the table below, and there are 21 producers that have 1 certified bag. Each of these 21 producers would pay a fee of $5,456. Another example is there are 6 producers with 3 certified bags each, and each of these 6 producers would pay a fee of $16,368. Again, the addition of new reusable grocery bags to our system would lower this fee if all other factors remain constant. Now moving on into Section 5, the procedure for submitting payment to the department. Funds that are submitted to the department will be deposited into the reusable grocery bag fund. Late payments will accrue interest, and delinquent accounts will result in the producer and their corresponding bags being removed from the certified reusable grocery bag producers list and also the reusable grocery bag reporting system. Finally, fees that are submitted to CalRecycle for the administrative certification fee are non-refundable. Lastly, Section 6, CalRecycle will maintain confidentiality as required by the California Public Records Act and also Section 40062 of the Public Resources Code and 17041 of the California Code of Regulations. Next up, we will be displaying the draft regulatory text section by section and soliciting feedback. As a reminder, CalRecycle will be collecting comments and feedback through November 17, 2017. For your comments, you can use the email listed at the top of this slide, sb270@calrecycle.ca.gov. You can also contact Robert or I using our email address or phone numbers that are listed on this slide. Please also sign up for our listserv to be notified of SB 270 activities. So for those of you watching the webcast, please send questions to the SB 270 email address, and we'll be checking those emails within the room. For those of you in the room, please identify yourself, state your affiliation, and please remember to speak into the microphone.
So we have the first section on scope and purpose. Anyone wish to comment on those? And I'll rely on Jim to say if there's any emails. Okay, let's go on to the next section, please, which is definitions. We have, as Paulina said, we have 6 proposed definitions. Anyone have comments or questions about any of those 6 definitions at this point? Chance to look at them. And you'll have to use.
Excuse me, there we go. There are 2 letters submitted by 2 different entities that have, they're actually fairly lengthy letters with a number of different questions, some of which pertain to certain definitions, some of which have to do with enforcement, some of which have to do with different topics. Without going through each of those, how would you like to proceed?
Well, I've already indicated what our enforcement authority is and is not, so I think we can handle that question on the side with those submitters. Jim, are there any particular questions about the definitions that you could pull out?
Well, for instance, there's one about the definition of store and how that pertains to which bags end up being certified. So it's kind of a combination question, really. I can read it and we can determine. Get a little closer here. So this is from Roger Matilla of AM Testing. They have a number of concerns, but the first one is the definition of a bag as it relates to the law. In the documents on your site, you define a RGB, which I believe is a regulated grocery bag, as one that is distributed by a specified store to a customer. You then go on in other parts of the documents that an RGB is defined as each type of bag that is offered for sale or distribution. This makes it very complicated, not only for testing laboratories, but also the manufacturers and stores to figure out what is going on. We believe that in the law it states that an RGB is a specific bag distributed by a specified store. And it goes on at length to talk about they may be certifying one particular bag at a specific point in time, but over time, this similar bag may have a different feedstock, or it may be made in a different plant. And their point, I believe, if I'm summarizing this correctly, is that there could be many different variations over time after that one bag has been certified.
So I'll take a stab at this real quick. Wendy Harmon. First, to get to the definition of a reusable grocery bag, the purpose in the regulations from our standpoint is to make sure the entire universe is known. As far as what constitutes a reusable bag, we've had extensive discussions, and at this point in time, I'm not sure if we're going to be able to offer much more description or definity in the law or through the regulations. We'll have to consult with our legal office and take a close look at exactly the breadth of information that Mr. Matilla has provided to us. And again, we will be following up with everyone that has provided us with comments in order to get more clarity if we're not sure we're interpreting what the concerns are. So I'll just ask Kate if she has anything to add.
Yeah, this is Kate Nita with the legal office, and I saw this morning that that email I think got forwarded around. So I think we might want to follow up with him directly because it sounds like there's a lot of specific concerns. But to speak directly to the reusable grocery bag producer definition, because I'm not sure if there's some confusion because we have it defined, I believe, in the proposed draft regs. Am I right? Yes, and it's also in the statute. And so I think my understanding is one of the reasons why we wanted to do that is because in statute it just says a reusable grocery bag is a bag that meets the requirements of section 42281. And if anyone has looked at that section, it is extremely long and full of information. And it kind of encompasses many, many different types of reusable grocery bags. And so the thought was using the regulatory definition to supplement the statutory definition and also kind of consolidate all the different types of reusable grocery bags into one shorter sentence. But otherwise, yeah, I haven't had a chance to look at that email, but I think it looks like we might have to have maybe a conversation in the future on that.
I was going to say one of his follow-on questions I think is related, and maybe it's the same answer. But he says, if a manufacturer changes the supplier of any of the raw materials or recycled materials or chose to produce it in a different plant, do they need to have the bag recertified?
Thanks, Jim. Sorry, I forgot I had a second thing I was going to say in response to that. And I think his concern about the bags changing post-certification is a good one. And I think we tried to address that when we talk about the biennial recertification process. But that is definitely something that we have been talking about internally, how we can clarify when a new certification is due at that biennial recertification time. So we appreciate his comments on that, and that's something we would definitely going to continue to look into.
Mm-hmm. I'm trying to distill some fairly lengthy questions and see if they're relating to what we're discussing right now. They have to do with how to have PCR certified and verified, which sounds like it might be later in the presentation. Yeah, we can come back to that perhaps. Also about basically how do we check what the certifications that are submitted, how do we check to make sure they're correct, things like that. So I think we're leading into that perhaps. Okay.
Okay, thanks, Jim. I think it's instructive to see those kinds of comments, as Kate and Wendy indicated. We will follow up in detail. We'll also post that comment and other written comments that we get so everybody sees, the various comments, and then we'll be working on those during the course of this informal rulemaking before we bring the formal text to our director for approval. Go ahead, Wendy.
Yeah, before we move on, just a couple quick additional points. One, the statute requires that any bag that is modified it's not a solely any modification that not is solely aesthetic requires a recertification. So that's the bit of statute that we've had discussions about whether or not it's within our authority to help clarify what that means, what an aesthetic change would or wouldn't consist of. So again, we'll be looking at that more closely. And then in regard to the definition of store, I don't think we can really ignore that one because that one has created a lot of consternation. My understanding is we are not able to clarify that definition in the regulatory process, but that is something that we intend to raise in the legislative report because that has been open to quite a bit of interpretation, and I do believe that there is some ambiguity in that definition, and that stores have, we've heard from hundreds of stores, all of them wanting to be in compliance and not really understanding whether or not the law applies to them. So we will be addressing that at a minimum through the legislative report.
John, did you want to speak? If we're still on definitions? And you're on.
Hi, this is John Pacciuto from the Western Plastics Association. And just a follow-up to that point that you made about whether the certification would be changed if the product changed and if there'd be an additional fee. You had two different concepts. Would that be different for concept one versus concept two? Concept one being, I think you said, producer-driven versus bag-driven.
I'm not sure if that would impact the fee or not. I think we're going to have to take a look at the concepts as they're written right now and see if we haven't considered that fully. When we originally were looking at this, we were trying to decide what might be the most equitable way to divide out the fee and what might work for industry, especially for companies that might want to expand their inventories. The fee itself, it's still, up for discussion, and we don't have an idea in our minds of which of these would work more effectively. So I think that's a good point, and we'll take that into consideration as we move forward.
Any other comments on definitions? Go ahead, Jim.
Sorry, we have a second letter here from Stephen Joseph, who is the self-described counsel for the newly formed Coalition to Enforce SB 270, and he has two main objections. I don't know that this speaks necessarily to definitions that were presented there, but I'll let you guys decide. His first objection has to do with the word shall versus may. He states that in the law, he's quoting, the proof of certification shall include all of the following: names and locations, quantity and dates of recycled content, et cetera, et cetera. And he states that the proposed use of the word may means the submission of the documents listed is optional, and he is arguing that the law states it's mandatory. So I don't know if that gets to definitions necessarily, but that's his first objection.
Well, I think it's more about the submittal process, but we might as well tackle that if you wish, or we can wait.
This is Wendy again. I can speak to the intent of what we were trying to do in the regs, and that was to clarify that a proof of certification may include more than a single document. We've received a bunch of different certifications to date, and they all vary in their content and in the number of pages they consist of and the content within them. So what we were trying to point out is that a proof of certification is not necessarily a single document. The law is very clear that the minimum content recycled requirements and the various associated requirements, such as the washing equipment that must be used, have to be met. So I don't think there's a question on whether the requirements have to be met. That's very clear in statute. The regs are not trying to diminish that in any way. They're actually trying to point out that we might see a certification that is comprised of multiple documents. And I will ask Kate to clarify that that is the case.
Thanks, Wendy. Yes, Mr. Joseph's point is well taken. I think I'm seeing the section that he's referring to where the word may is used, and I can see why that would be potentially misleading. So we'll definitely have a look at that and make sure that it's clear that the may is referring to, as Wendy said, the possibility of submitting multiple documents, and not that those documents or the information within however many documents it takes is optional. So thank you for that.
Okay, clearly, oh, Melissa, go ahead. Let's get you the mic.
Hello, Melissa Romero with Californians Against Waste. I had a comment actually on the same line, the use of may. So 1 and 2, after C, 1 and 2 are both required, but 3, the objection letter from FDA, I think that one actually is the optional, for the chemical test. So, possibly just making it clear that 1 and 2 out of that list are required information.
Okay, let's save that one since that's going to come up later. Make sure that we address that, Melissa, when we get to that section on the text. I know we addressed one of the comments. I'm just going to try and keep us focused on the going through. So what's the next section I think we can go to? Submittal and resubmittal of a proof of certification. Up to comments on that section. Okay. Not seeing any hands or hearing of any emails. We'll go ahead and move on to section 17988.4, the administrative certification fee schedule, which has the 2 basic concepts that Paulina talked about. So I think this is the opportunity to talk, are there issues that you see with either one of these concepts? Are there pros and cons? Which one is more equitable from your perspective or more practical? Whatever kind of comments you wish to provide. Melissa, if you can identify yourself again.
Melissa Romero with Californians Against Waste again. This is more a comment on the language in this section that refers to failure to submit full payment being subject to removal from the list. And we just wanted to comment that the failure to submit proof of certification that affirms full compliance should also be a reason to be removed from that list. If the failure to pay the fee is also going to be part of that, then both of those should be.
Thanks, Melissa. I don't know if we have any comment at this point other than to take that input and consider that. Okay, thank you. Does anyone have strong feelings one way or the other on concept 1 or concept 2?
Quick question on the concept 2.
I'm sorry, if you could identify yourself.
Sorry, Roxanne Speakerman Vaughn with Roplast. Quick question on concept number 2. It states that it costs equally per each type of bag. From my perspective, does that mean each size or each print? Have they looked into that detail? Is it for every single print, every unit? How would you define that?
I think this is getting in, excuse me, this is Wendy again. I think this is getting into the comments that the lab submitted to us, and I do think we're going to need to take a close look at that. I'm not sure how much more specificity we're going to be able to provide in terms of, again, what's an aesthetic modification versus every other possible type of modification. But clearly this is an interest of concern to many, and so we'll see what we can do to try to address that with a little more clarity.
Thank you, Wendy. One other question I did have, would there be any consideration to incorporating an incentive program of some kind for California reclaimers and manufacturers that are reclaiming post-consumer here within the state and are manufacturing in the state? With regards to the fee schedule, perhaps having it be more incentivized towards those California reclaimers and manufacturers?
I think that's probably something we'd have to address in our legislative update, our report to the legislature, because again, without monies designated and without authority provided to us to institute that type of incentive program, we wouldn't be able to to tackle that, and we certainly couldn't do anything like that through the regulatory process. But again, I'll let Kate clarify that.
I just want to add that I'm hearing a lot of good ideas and input out there. So if anyone in the room or listening online has some ideas for how we could address like the modification stuff or any of these other ideas that might be something that you would be interested in seeing, please let us know and as detailed as possible. I think we're accepting written comments as well. So that's really helpful for us so that we have something to work with when we kind of go back to the drawing board.
Certainly.
And I think that, excuse me for just 1 second, the last comment that you made, Roxanne, I just want to reiterate what Wendy said, is that we will also keep a list of the issues that, while they're not within the regulatory purview that we have right now, would be things that we can discuss as part of the legislative report that's due March 1st, so pretty soon. So thank you.
Hi, Charles Brooks, also with Roplast. In looking over this, you guys have an annual estimated operating cost of $739,000. And if we're looking at example 1, and you have 50 producers, one of the kind of disadvantages to that is you may eliminate small producers. If that gets down to 10 producers, and now those producers are sharing they're taking the lion's share of this, is there going to be some clarity on what makes up that $739,000? Because we see $200,000 in staff costs, but where are those other costs coming from, and what type of input can we as producers have on how those costs are calculated and stuff like that? If we're going to be paying this, we kind of want to, have some transparency there.
Yeah, I think we can explain it. And if you look at the attachment, not the regulatory text, but there is at least an initial description of what the CalRecycle's administrative costs are, which include some startup costs and then ongoing costs for permanent staff and so on. So I don't know if Sarah wants to provide anything or Wendy, but these are documented costs that are directly accruable to the staffing and resources that we have at CalRecycle.
Sarah Keck, Fiscal Services, CalRecycle.
Sarah, you have to speak a little more into the mic.
Oh, okay.
Thanks.
Is that better? Is it working? Is it on?
We'll see.
The $739,000 is actually comprised of our operating costs pursuant to the Budget Act. We work with Department of Finance and the legislature on coming up with our operating costs for this program. We also as we also indicated in the budget change proposal that's on Department of Finance's website, we have early implementation costs for 16-17 of approximately $149,000. And for 17-18, the appropriation was $298,000 for staffing, and 18-19 was $292,000. This is a two-year operating cost. We're currently in 17-18, so the two-year operating cost is the 17-18 and 18-19 plus our startup costs of the $149,000 for the first half or last half of 16-17.
Thanks, Sarah. And we're happy to take further questions on that if you wish. Yeah, got. Thanks, Russ. One just came in. Good, let's take the mic first, and then we'll.
Hi, Chair Shingala with Command Packaging and Encore Recycling. The question I have is, if we're submitting these every 2 years and paying the fees every 2 years, what happens in that meantime? So if bag suppliers come on or they come off, like what point in time are you deciding, like on concept 1, how many bag suppliers are paying that fee? So just something to consider on that. And I know we've talked quite a bit about concept number 2 and the amount of bags. And definitely, we have customers who are changing things just slightly, even on sizes, but still in compliance with SB 270. So we really ask that that be taken into consideration and not have to pay for each time we do that.
Thank you. Jim, you had an email?
Yes, one just came in. It's regarding some of the discussions of aesthetic changes as well as timeliness of certification and tests. And this is about a paragraph's worth, so I can read this, I think. This is from Philip Rosinski of Novolex. Aesthetics, while partly addressed already, the following should help clarify direction discussion. The determination if a new certificate must be submitted is based on any change other than aesthetic. No definition of aesthetic is provided. Consideration for any change in material color, recipe, or ink color can be seen as more than aesthetic as it triggers testing required in 4221 or 42281A5. This is based on the requirement to test for heavy metals, since the source of heavy metal contamination is in synthetic fibers is directly tied to colorants. In particular, in foreign produced materials and inks, this can be a challenge that should be tested for. This is important as it will also determine number of bags tested. For example, the same bag material with white ink versus black ink could change readings for heavy metals as required in section 422181A5, which requires testing for, quote, does not contain lead, cadmium, or any other toxic material that may pose a threat to public health. This is driven by public safety and per the statute. That said, the same bag and ink, assuming the same suppliers, but with a change in printing plates, would not change the risk for change in heavy metals testing. And then he has one line versus regarding the biennial submission. Should biennial submission also imply that testing is only valid for 2 years, i.e., any ATP-001 test would expire 2 years after certificate is issued?
Again, those are all great comments, and we will obviously have to have a larger discussion internally about what constitutes a bag and what constitutes an aesthetic change. So thank you.
Other perspectives or comments on concepts 1 and 2? Okay, we can move on to, okay. Thank you. Roxanne. And if you can just again.
Roxanne Speakerman Vaughn with Roplast. A quick question on the certified suppliers that are currently on the CalRecycle website. There are some that are simply just suppliers. They are not manufacturers. In this particular instance, is there going to be any type of enforcement to determine if the people paying are indeed manufacturers? Is there going to be any investigation to that? Or, I mean, they ought to be manufacturers by the way the bill is written, but there's clearly some on there that are not manufacturing.
So this is Wendy again, and I'll just say that any enforcement-related activity in any way, shape, or form, we've been either forwarding to the, instructing people to bring their concerns to the Attorney General's office or to the local jurisdiction where the bags are being sold. So at this point, again, Kate can offer any other clarification, but at this point, that is our sole instruction.
Thanks, Wendy.
This is Kate. I just wanted to add, thanks, Paulina just pointed out to me because I was thinking that might be in there. There is, looking at the definition of reusable grocery bag producer in statute, and that's for Public Resources Code 42280E. It is generally manufacturers who would be on that list, but it could also be importers or distributors. If I think, I'm just kind of looking at this cold, but if there isn't a manufacturer, I think it's, yeah. So it could be many different types of entities. But yeah, but that's a great comment. Thank you.
Okay, any other comments? Otherwise, we'll move on to next section, which is procedures for submitting payment. Probably a little more straightforward than what's an aesthetic change and how many times do we need to certify and so on. But nevertheless, are there any questions about this section? Probably not. We'll keep all these sections open, but we're just getting through. So the next section, proprietary information. Obviously, we want to be able to protect information that's considered proprietary. This is pretty standard in our rulemaking, and we're very comfortable with implementing this kind of provision. But anybody have any questions about it?
Howard, the letter from Stephen Joseph does have a comment in that regard. This is his second objection regarding the parts of the statute that say the department shall maintain the confidentiality of information, et cetera, et cetera. He basically says that, well, it's a very lengthy letter, but his basic conclusion is that CalRecycle may not withhold from production, meaning production for, I believe, a Records Act request, any documents submitted to it by producers regardless of claims of confidentiality, etc. If a producer wishes to distribute or sell reusable plastic bags in California pursuant to SB 270, it must disclose all documents and information that support its claim. So I think the gist of his comments is that CalRecycle must supply all those documents to a requestor.
Thank you, Jim. And I know Mr. Joseph and the department have had some conversations on this previously, but I just want to reiterate, just for the benefit of everyone, that these provisions that are cited in the regulations, the Public Records Act, and our corresponding Public Resources Code referring to the treatment of any document that is in the possession, any document record, which could be anything, in this case, the proofs of certifications, are subject to the Public Records Act, that provision of the Public Resources Code that applies directly to us, and then our regulations that we have promulgated pursuant to those statutes, which are what's listed in the draft regulatory text. And those provisions apply across the board all the time to any document, record, in this case, the proofs of certification that are in the possession of the department. As a courtesy, we've included this language here just to sort of draw attention to anyone who is just looking at these regs to kind of trigger the fact that those provisions do apply here, as always, to everything in our possession. So this is just because we have been getting a few Public Records Act requests, so this was more of a courtesy to draw attention to it, but I just want to clarify that these protections always exist no matter what.
Okay, we'll go ahead and keep it open. Comments on any of the sections that we've now covered everything in the text. Are there any go backs that anybody wishes or other comments that you would like to add relative to the proposed text?
This is Wendy. While you're all pondering that, I just want to reiterate what Kate said. Any ideas that you have for tightening up our language or for providing further clarity that would be helpful to you in your operations and in the division of the certification fee would be greatly appreciated. And again, even ideas such as the ones Roxanne brought up will be helpful for us as we start working a little bit more diligently on completing our legislative report.
Okay, we have 3 more hours for the workshop. These are a lot of good comments. Certainly there's some detailed comments that we have heard both verbally and in writing that we need to take into account, and I have some discussions both internally and with stakeholders. Our time frame, maybe Wendy, you can run through, or Paulina, you can kind of run through that again. Maybe Robert, you can pull back the time frame slide. We would like to be able to take this, a formal proposal to our director in the next couple of months so that we can move forward on this. If it seems that there are too many disparate viewpoints and we're not able to figure out something that we think is going to work and that we're comfortable with proposing, we could always have another workshop. I'm not committing to that, but we will be taking these all under consideration and redrafting the regulations to try to address some of the concerns that have been raised today within the authority that's vested in us by the statute. There are definite constraints on what we can do. So that's where we're also soliciting your ideas, and we've heard several today about things that we can include in the legislative report that are issues that could be clarified with further amendments to the statute. Anybody want to add anything on the staff? Go ahead, Paulina.
Yeah. So again, for a little look into the rulemaking timeline again, we'll be collecting your public comments through November 17th, and then we'll be incorporating that into the next draft of the regulations. And so we anticipate bringing that to the CalRecycle public meeting, the rulemaking packet, in early 2018, so approximately the February or March public meeting. So this includes the notice of proposed rulemaking, initial statement of reasons, and the text for the regulations. The next comment period will be 45 days after that, and so that should run through spring 2018. And after that public comment, there will be another public hearing. And if revisions are needed, that will trigger another 15 or 45-day public comment. We'll have another, we'll go to the CalRecycle meeting again in the summer or fall of 2018, and then finally submit that back to OAL.
Yeah, so Paulina has just described the formal rulemaking process under the Administrative Procedures Act that we have to follow once we trigger the formal rulemaking. So right now we're still informal. We're not obligated to respond in writing to every comment that we get. So typically what we do is we will continue discussions with folks who've submitted comments to make sure we understand what they're providing and what some of their concerns are. We'll have internal discussions. That'll then be reflected in revised draft text. As Paulina said, we're hoping to bring that to the director in the February, March timeframe. Typically what we do in those items at the public meeting is we will have a summary of all the stakeholder comments that we've gotten. It won't be Roxanne said this and somebody said that and John said something else. It'll be more, here's the themes that we heard, the issues that stakeholders brought forth, and here's CalRecycle's rationale for how we're addressing them in the revised text. Once our director does approve the text, then we have to submit the package to the Office of Administrative Law, and then when OAL approves that, we can start the 45-day formal comment period that Paulina referred to. And at that point in time, we are obligated as part of the final rulemaking package to respond to every comment individually. So that's part of that rulemaking process. But to the extent that we can iron things out in this informal process and maybe get 90% of the issues resolved, that's kind of our intent right now. So I hope that explains a little bit about where we are today and kind of where we'll be in the formal rulemaking process. I'll just check with Jim once more. Are there any additional emails? Okay. Check with everybody here at the dais if you want to say anything. Okay, John, sure.
Hi, John Picciuto, President of the Western Plastics Association. Just want to make a comment, really. And I know it's not this group's responsibility, but I can't stress enough the importance of the certification and inclusion of post-consumer in these products. And that's something that's very important to many people here in the room and listening online. So just wanted to make sure that that point was made. Thank you.
Point is well taken, and Roxanne, we got a couple of hands now, but certainly with the new bans in China and so on, the whole issue of post-consumer content in products here and is becoming even it's even more pressing. So, yeah, go ahead.
Laura Ledbetter with Superbag. Under what he was saying from WPA, again, going back to the post-consumer recycled content and what Roxana said, if we're trying to use a recycled material, the plastic, or recycle the plastic from California or the U.S. to get rid of some of our trash here in the U.S., it kind of negates what we're doing if we're purchasing from overseas. So just something to think about.
Thank you. Roxanne?
Roxanne Speakman Vaughn with Roplast. My question is more on administrative, in terms of the enforcement of the fees. I know that CalRecycle doesn't have the jurisdiction to enforce the actual certification process, but who's going to enforce these fees? If a manufacturer, say, does not pay, what will be the process? Will they be immediately removed from the site as a certified supplier? I mean, what will be the general process, and is there jurisdiction to do that?
I can speak to the fact that if a producer doesn't pay, my understanding is our plan, I think, is to remove them. We will definitely remove them, and I think remove them immediately. Isn't that right? Like, as soon as they don't pay. And as far as, I don't know if you're also asking about, I don't know. I think if they just don't pay, we remove them. I don't know if there's any rule you guys have. No, that's about it. I think we'll remove immediately is our plan.
Okay, so you do have the jurisdiction to remove them then?
Right, yeah,
Okay.
if they don't pay.
Any closing comments from any of you at the dais here?
This is Wendy.
On
I'll
the spot.
just jump in one more time and invite you all to please send us your comments in written form. And if you would like to meet with my staff or myself, in the meantime, we will happily make ourselves available. So please, now's the time to get in touch with us before we initiate formal rulemaking. And thank you again for your participation here today, both online and in the room.
And in those comments, I think Kate said this, or Wendy, but I think it was Kate. You know, if you have specific language suggestions to the proposed text, that's very useful for us to see so that we can vet whether that's something we want to incorporate or, you know, just how to go about changing this. If you give us a general comment, we'll certainly consider it. But the more specific you can be, the better off, the better it'll be for us. So, okay, just one last check on email. Nope. Okay, so I appreciate everybody's attendance today. I think these were really excellent comments and feedback for us in this stage of the process. We're glad to be here finally starting this rulemaking, and so we will be endeavoring to get it, you know, through the process and into the formal rulemaking process as quickly as we can, so that we can get this finalized and everybody knows what the game plan and the approach will be. So thank you again. Sign up for the listserv, be in contact with us, and we will be talking to you soon. Thanks very much.